The judge banged the gavel. I still remember the sound. It wasn't loud. It was a dry, almost polite snap. But inside me, it sounded like a steel door closing at the bottom of the ocean. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. At that moment, the whole world fell silent. I looked at my own hands, handcuffed in front of me, and thought, these hands commanded an army. Out there, I was the king. The streets trembled when my name was spoken. But there, in that old wooden courtroom with its cold light, I was nobody. I was no longer a man. I was a number waiting for death in a concrete cell. And the worst part, I thought I had won up to that point. I thought the monster I had built inside myself was too strong to be broken. I was wrong. Let me tell you something before anything else. I wasn't a follower. I was never the guy who took orders. I was the leader. I had hundreds of men under my command. I had money that wouldn't fit in the walls of my house. I had cars, I had weapons, I had respect, or at least what I called respect, which was really just fear by another name. I feared no one. I lived by the sword for 15 years and was ready to die by it at any moment. For me, dying young was just part of the contract. But today I'm going to tell you something that no one in that world would believe. I'm going to tell you how the man I hated most in my life, the name I used as an insult, the name I cursed every day, entered my maximum security cell at midnight, and how he did what no enemy army, no judge, no prison system, no bullet ever managed to do. He shattered the monster that lived inside me, and beneath that monster, he found the boy I had buried alive many years ago. Sit down. This is my story. To understand how I ended up in that cell, you need to understand where I came from. No one is born a monster. Monsters are built, brick by brick, pain by pain. I grew up in a neighborhood where silence was the only safe sound, where the sound of gunshots at night was as common as a dog barking. My father left before I learned what a father was. My mother worked 3 jobs, and even then the refrigerator was empty more often than full. I learned early on that no one was going to save me. No one was coming. The cavalry didn't exist for kids like me. So I did what every hungry and frightened child does when no one is around. I became the most dangerous thing on the block so that no one could ever hurt me again. I started small, stealing, watching the corner, delivering packages I didn't even know what was inside. But I had something the others didn't. I didn't back down. When the other kids hesitated, I moved forward. When the others were afraid, I smiled. And in the streets, courage, even sick courage, rotten courage, is a currency that buys everything. I rose quickly, faster than I expected. By 17, I already had men older than me calling me boss. By 20, I controlled entire territories. Violence became my mother tongue. It was the only way I knew how to communicate with the world. You want respect? You take it. You want territory? You spill blood for it. You want them to stop messing with you? You become the nightmare that haunts the dreams of others. And I became very good at it. Too good. I'll be honest with you, because this story only has value if it's honest. I hurt people. I did things I won't describe in detail here because some doors, once opened, let in things that are better left uninvited. But I carried lives in my hands. I took things I could never give back. And the scariest thing? For a long time, I felt nothing. I had turned something off inside me, like flipping a switch. It was the only way to survive. Feeling on the streets kills you. On the outside, I had everything. The gold chains, the watches, the respect of everyone who crossed my path. People thought I was a king. But let me tell you what nobody else saw. At night, when everyone left, when the last of my men closed the door, I was alone. And I couldn't sleep without a gun under my pillow. I jumped at any noise. I had lost so many friends that I stopped going to funerals because there were too many. I saw their faces when I closed my eyes. Boys who grew up with me, who laughed with me, who dreamed with me, all underground or locked away or turned into ghosts of themselves by the same life I led. I had power, but I lived in terror. I had money, but I was empty. I had hundreds of men around me, but I never, not for a second, felt less alone. That life promised me freedom, and it delivered me the deepest slavery that exists. The slavery of being your own jailer. I was a prisoner of fear, a prisoner of hatred, a prisoner of the man I had forced myself to be. The darkness outside was nothing compared to the darkness I carried inside my chest. And this darkness had a bill to pay. And every bill eventually comes due. They say empires fall slowly. That's a lie. Mine fell in seconds. It was in the early hours of the morning. I remember the heat. I remember the smell of the air. I was in one of those places where I felt safest, surrounded by the men I trusted most. And it was there that I learned the bitterest lesson of the streets. The steel that cuts you the most is always the steel of the hand you shook. Someone spoke, someone who ate at my table, someone I protected, someone I called brother, someone I would have died for. When the door fell, it was like the end of the world. Lights everywhere, screams, the dry sound of boots on the floor. I remember thinking in that split second that I should react, that I should grab the gun, that this was how I always imagined it would end, in a flash of fire. But something stopped me. I don't know what it was at the time. Today I know. Today I know there was a hand on mine that I couldn't see. I surrendered. And as the cold metal closed around my wrists, I looked around and saw my entire world crumble. The men who swore loyalty unto death, running. The territory I bled to conquer, now covered in red and blue lights. Everything I built in 15 years, everything, turning to dust before my eyes. 15 years. To end in 15 seconds. And I remember something strange. In the midst of all that chaos, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear. I felt exhaustion. A weariness so profound it felt like I'd been carrying it since I was born. As if a part of me deep down whispered, "It's over. It's finally over." I didn't know yet, but that wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The trial was swift. When you were who I was, they'd already decided your fate before you even stepped into the room. The evidence piled up. The faces of the people I'd hurt filled that courtroom, and I sat there, in a suit, looking like a civilized man, while they told the world everything the monster had done. And then came the hammer. And then came the word. Perpetual. There's one word that weighs more than any chain they put on me. Perpetual. Forever. Think about it. Forever. I always thought I knew what it was like to be in prison. I'd been in cells before, stayed for a while, gotten out. It was part of the game. But life imprisonment is different. Life imprisonment isn't a punishment. It's the burial of a man who's still breathing. They took me to maximum security, and because of who I was, because of my history, they threw me in solitary confinement. The hole, the cell within the cell. Let me describe to you what it's like. Imagine a concrete box, no bigger than a bathroom, no window, or with a crack so small that the light that gets in is more of an insult than a comfort. A concrete bed, a steel door that closes with a sound I'll take to my grave, and silence. A silence so thick you can hear the blood rushing in your ears. Outside, I had built my entire life around noise. The noise of men, the noise of parties, the noise of power, the noise of fear. I used that noise to drown out the only thing I never wanted to face, myself. And now they had taken all the noise away. It was just me left. Me and the monster, locked together in that concrete box. The first few days I spent angry. I banged on the door until my hands bled. I cursed. I swore revenge against the man who betrayed me. I promised myself I would get out, that I would get everything back, that this was just a phase. My pride was still standing, with clenched fists. But concrete is patient. Silence is patient. And day after day, hour after hour, that place scraped away my layers, one by one. First came the anger that ran out. Then came the hope of escaping. Then came the fantasy of revenge. And when all that crumbled, what remained was one thing I had run from my whole life: the truth about who I was. And it was there, at rock bottom, that the faces began to reappear. The faces of the people I had hurt, the mothers who cried because of me, the boys I dragged into that life and who never left it, my own mother, who died while I was too busy being king to go see her. And I, who had never cried in 15 years, because crying in the streets is weakness and weakness is death, I broke down. It wasn't a pretty cry. It was a sound I didn't even know existed inside me. It was the sound of a man seeing himself for the first time and hating what he saw. I reached a point, and I've never told many people this, where I didn't want to live anymore. I looked into that darkness and thought that the world and I myself would be better off if I simply didn't exist anymore. I was at the bottom of a well where no light reaches, where not even God, I thought, could reach me. I was the definition of a lost cause, hardened, stained with blood, condemned by men, and I was sure condemned by heaven. And it was precisely there, in the darkest place of my life, that the light decided to appear. I need to tell you something first. A few weeks ago, a chaplain had walked through the corridors. An old man, soft-spoken, the kind you look at and think, he wouldn't last 5 minutes in my world. He stopped in front of my cell. I spat insults at him. I said things I'm ashamed to repeat. I told him and his God to go to hell. He didn't fight back. He just smiled, with a sadness in his eyes that wasn't pity. It was love, though at the time I didn't know the difference. And before leaving, he slid a small book under the bars, an old, battered Bible, its cover almost falling off. I picked up that book and threw it in the corner of the cell. It sat there, gathering dust for weeks. I looked at it with disgust. To me, that was the book of the weak, the book of cowards, the book of the man I hated most. But that night when I hit rock bottom, that night when I didn't want to breathe anymore, something made me pick up that book. I can't explain it. It was as if an invisible hand had pushed me toward that corner. I picked up the Bible, my hands trembling more from desperation than faith. I didn't even know how to read it properly. I opened it to a random page in the dark, and my eyes fell on some words. These were words about a man named Saul, a man who persecuted, who hurt, who approved of the death of innocents, a man with blood on his hands. And I read how that man on the road was struck down by a light, and how a voice called him by name, and how that man, full of hatred, became someone full of love. And one phrase pierced me like a bullet. The idea that this Christ came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the chief, the main one, the worst of all. I read that and thought, if there's room in heaven for the worst of all, maybe there's room for me too. And that's when it happened. I don't know how to describe it to you without it sounding crazy, but I'll try, because it's the most real thing that's ever happened to me in my life. That dark, cold, closed concrete cell, it filled up. Not with light like from a lamp, with a presence, with warmth. It was as if someone had entered through that steel door without opening the steel door. I felt it, and I swear on my life, I felt that I was no longer alone. And that presence brought no judgment. That's what destroyed me the most. I, who expected fire, punishment, a finger pointed at me. I, who deserved all of that. I was flooded by something I had never felt in my entire existence. Love. A love that asked for nothing in return. A love that knew everything I had done, every crime, every person hurt, every sin hidden in the dark, and that loved me anyway. Not despite knowing everything. I, who only knew hatred. I, who spoke the language of violence. I was taken by surprise by the strongest thing in the universe, and it wasn't violence. It was love. I collapsed on the floor of that cell. I, the king of the streets, the man who feared no one, I broke down like a child. And I cried it all out. 15 years of blood, of fear, of pain, of sleepless nights, of ghosts. It all came out. And with each tear, it felt like some weight was being lifted from me. And there, on that floor, I spoke the first real words I'd spoken in years. I said, "If you are real, cleanse me. I can't carry this alone. I don't want to be this man anymore. Take my life because I don't know what to do with it anymore." And he took it. Man, that night in the most isolated cell of a maximum security prison with a life sentence hanging over me, I became freer than I had ever been in all the years I walked the streets with the world in the palm of my hand. The monster died in that cell, and the boy I had buried alive back there could finally breathe again. I wish I could tell you that the walls fell, that angels opened the gates, and that I walked out to freedom that very morning. It didn't happen that way. When the sun rose, I was still in that cell. The bars were still there. The sentence still read, life imprisonment. But everything was different. Because they could lock up my body, but for the first time in my life, my soul was free. I started reading that book every day. I devoured it. The same hands that once held weapons now turned those pages as if my life depended on it, because it did. I learned about forgiveness. I learned about grace. And the hardest thing of all, I learned to forgive, including the man who betrayed me, including myself, which was the longest battle of all. And then God started doing something funny. That concrete box that was supposed to be my tomb, he transformed into a pulpit. The other men started to notice. The same guys who knew me by reputation, who knew my past, who feared me. They started asking what had happened to me. Because the man who entered that prison was full of hatred. And the man they saw now had a peace that made no sense in that place. And I told the story. I told it to everyone who wanted to listen. I, who once led men to death, was now beginning to lead men to life. I became a shepherd within those bars. The men the whole world had thrown away, the ones no one visited, the ones who had already given up on themselves, I sat with them. I cried with them. I said to each of them the same thing that presence told me that night. You are not the sum of your worst days. There is forgiveness. There is a way back. No heart is too hard. I am living proof. Lives changed in that corridor. Violent men softened. Hopeless men found hope. That prison, which was a place of death, became a place of resurrection. And I finally understood what my purpose was. For all those years, I sought power. And true power, I discovered, is not in making a man fear you. It's in helping a broken man rise again. Now, I know what you're wondering, but are you still in jail? Let me tell you this. The story of my sentencing had twists and turns that only God could have written. Appeals, lawsuits, doors that opened in ways my lawyers couldn't explain. And then one day, years later, that steel door opened for me one last time, and I walked through it toward freedom. But I want you to understand one thing, and this is the most important part of my whole story. I was already free long before that door opened. True freedom isn't about being outside the bars. I've met free men out there who were the most imprisoned I've ever seen. Trapped in hatred, addiction, fear, in the same darkness I lived in. And I've met men behind bars freer than any king. Because the only prison that matters is the prison you carry in your heart. And there is only one who holds the key to it. Today, I dedicate my life to telling this story. I go to prisons. I talk to kids on the streets, kids who are exactly like I was, with the same anger, the same pain, the same hunger for respect. And I look them in the eyes and I say, there is another way. You don't have to go through all of hell like I did. And that's why I'm here, talking to you now. Perhaps you're listening to this and thinking you've gone too far. That you've done things that can't be undone. That you're a lost cause, hardened, stained, condemned. Perhaps you're in your own cell right now, It might be a concrete cell, or it might be a cell made of addiction, depression, guilt, a life you no longer recognize. I want you to hear this coming from a man who commanded armies, who shed blood, who received a life sentence, who touched the bottom of the darkest pit that exists. There is no such thing as a lost cause for God. If he passed through walls of steel and concrete to enter the cell of a hardened gang leader at midnight, a man who cursed his name, a man who threw his Bible in the corner, the worst of them all, then there is no place too deep, no darkness too thick, no heart too hard for him to reach. He entered my cell, and he's standing at your door right now. The question isn't whether he will accept you. He has already proven that he will accept even the worst of us. The question is, will you pick up that book from the corner of the room? Will you say those words I said on that cold floor? If you are real, take my life. Because I did it. And I, who was just a number waiting for death in a concrete cell, am now a free man, a new man, a forgiven man. If he did that for me, my friend, he can without a doubt do it for you. This was my testimony. May God bless you, and may the light that entered my cell now enter your heart.